Hey there, I'm Jackie Ferris. This week on the 302, we are at the Delaware Museum of Nature and Science, going where the public never gets to go behind the scenes to check out some of the animals in the attic and find out why they're so important for research and educational purposes. Get ready, the 302 is headed your way. When you visit the Delaware Museum of Nature and Science, there's a lot to see on the first floor. But if you go upstairs, there's a lot to see in terms of education and in research. Now, I'm joined here in the storage area by Matthew Halley. He's one of the curators. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi. Great to be here.
Now, this is a very unique area in that you have all of these animals that you use for education, but you don't really know a lot, unlike some of your other items in the collections that you have. You don't really know a lot about where they came from. Is that right?
Sometimes, yeah. So the taxidermy that's here in this storage area, a lot of these items were donated decades ago by private individuals, and they brought them here for safekeeping and because they would be useful for education and potentially research. And a lot of these are one-of-a-kind items that we'll never get again. So we keep them here in storage for the future.
So I'm going to point to the obvious, which is these two bears here. It really gives you an idea of how large an animal these bears are.
I know, incredible, right? Look at the size of these claws.
It really is amazing. And, you know, it's something that you would never get a chance to survive and get up close unless you were to come to an educational institution like this, you know, and these were on display, right?
Yeah, so these two bears were previously on display in the exhibits downstairs, but last year we went through major renovation, right. And these two bears rotated off the floor, and so they came back up here to storage, and some other items that were up here in storage now are down on the floor to keep the exhibits fresh for the viewers.
So it really must be a challenge whenever you get some of these items to try to think, okay, well, the next time I want to do an exhibit on X, Y, and Z, this is what we have to kind of, you know, get a research, I guess, a usefulness in terms of research out of the things that are donated to you or that you collect.
Yeah, a lot of times we don't know what renovations might happen in the future or what exhibits we might put together years from now, and at that time we'll want to tap our resources to try to use some of the items that are in our collection to tell the story or educate the public about a particular topic, and so we go to our collections where, thank goodness, we've been taking care of these objects for years and years, and we have them at our disposal.
I guess one of the things that a challenge would be how to store them. I guess moths are a really big issue when it comes to animals that are preserved in this way for research purposes.
Yeah, that's a big issue with collections generally, is the insect pests, because insects can damage the taxidermied items over time. All of the animals that are in the storage unit here, we've put through a freezer treatment, a 2-week freezer treatment, and just recently actually, because we renovated this whole space and took all of these items. Unfortunately, these giant bears behind us won't fit in the freezer. So we built a big tent out of plastic and put little moth traps in the tent, and we essentially kept them in a quarantine for about 2 or 3 months, and which is about as good as we could do without using some sort of chemical treatment for the insects, which we prefer not to do.
Right. It's important to do that, in that some of these animals that we look around, you know, may not be around for, you know, the foreseeable future, depending on climate change and just extinction.
Yeah, so we're in the middle of a biodiversity crisis on the Earth currently, where extinction rates are higher than they were historically, and a lot of animals are threatened by development of all types, forest deforestation and the expanding of pavement and human settlements, and a lot of the environments are rapidly changing, and the organisms that live there in those environments, the animals and plants, some of them are threatened or endangered. And here we have specimens that were collected decades and decades ago, and including some extinct species, endangered species, and these are specimens that are one of a kind, and we're not going to have an opportunity to collect any more of these specimens in the future. So there may come a day when these specimens are the only educational tool that we have available to teach the public about these animals or plants that used to live in this environment.
That really would be a sad day, I think, whenever you get to that point. You see all of these animals and you think, oh, it's amazing that they are preserved like this so that people can learn about where they lived and what the environment was. But whenever you have something that you've had in your collection for so long that maybe was donated to you, I mean, you don't really know, for instance, besides what kind of pests that may be interested in nibbling on them, but how they were preserved. So it could actually be a hazard in a sense if people were to touch these things. That's why they're
we prefer people not to touch the objects because different objects were treated with different some objects were the bases that some of the taxidermy are mounted on. Decades and decades ago, people used asbestos when they built those bases.
I noticed that this little thing that says asbestos negative.
Yep, this polar bear is asbestos negative. We had the base here tested when we were doing our renovations, and different toxins or harmful chemicals for example, asbestos. Just standing here next to the polar bear with the asbestos, well, this one doesn't have asbestos, but this one back here does. Just standing here next to it isn't going to be harmful to our health. But if we were sawing into that base and we just recently renovated our exhibits downstairs and had to mount a polar bear up in the air, and we had to just destroy the original base and build a new base. And before we did any of that, we went and got that base tested for asbestos to make sure that we were going to be safe in the conservation actions that we were taking to prepare this specimen for our new exhibits. And so each of these items has long-term conservation challenges. The fur has pigment in it, and pigment could react with the acid in the paper that the object is sitting on if it's sitting there for decades. And so we use unbuffered paper so that the pigment isn't damaged, right? So we need to think ahead with each of these objects about what are the conservation challenges for the objects and how we can be the best stewards of these objects as we can, because that's really what we're here to do, is to take care of these legacy objects for decades in the future so that they can still be used for educational purposes 100 years from now.
Absolutely. So while these have primarily a educational value, there are a number of other items in the collections, primarily birds and mollusks, that have a significant research value, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that when our behind-the-scenes look continues after this.
I'm Brenton Grom. I'm the director of the Reed House and Gardens, and we love having the 302 here in the center of history, Old Newcastle.
Welcome back. We were at the Delaware Museum of Nature and Science, finding out about all the research and education that goes on behind the scenes where we can't see it. I am now joined by the Director of Collections, Liz Shea, to talk a little bit about research. Now, this is a research institute, right?
It absolutely is a research institute. We've got 2 curators and a collections manager who work upstairs behind the scenes, and we do basic biology research research. We look at biodiversity, the differences, how animals are related to each other. We look at what they look like in prehistoric time. So we try to do a little bit of everything up here. And we have a very large collection that is useful not just for work and research here on site, but it's also something that we are pushing out all of this information to researchers around the world as we digitize our collection and as we get it incorporated into data portals that people can use and download and see what we have on offer.
So what do we have here? It looks like we've got some squid, is that right?
We have some squid. These are my favorite, a few of my favorite things. So my research background is in cephalopods, which are squids and octopuses. And so we have a collection here of animals that were, well, this one was collected at the Gully Marine Protected Area in the Northwest Atlantic. And this is a group of squids called, they're the family Brachioteuthidae. And we've got a couple of different research projects going on based on these specimens. So these specimens were collected in 2007. And so they've been fixed in formalin and preserved in alcohol, so they're good to be used for the next 100 years, the next 200 years. And you can do all number of things with them. We can take measurements of the shape of their body. We can count the number of suckers that are found on their arms. We can look inside their stomachs and see what they had for dinner. And so really we've got, it's really just the imagination of the researcher that will inhibit any sort of research. There's all sorts of things that can happen here. In our case, we're doing a lot of investigation into how things change over time, how their shapes change over time. So we've got two projects going on. One that has to do with the very smallest of specimens. So these are some juveniles. You can see they're only about 20 millimeters maybe in mantle length or 30 millimeters. And we're looking at how their overall body changes as they grow and whether there are big changes that happen all at once that might help us identify what stage of life they're in. Are they a juvenile or are they an adult? And so that's one project we're working on. And the other project is a project I'm working on with a volunteer. So we've got a volunteer who's been with us for 10 plus years. And she's a research scientist herself and is looking at the very particular changes in the shape of the fins and how those changes in shape might have an implication to how they can move through the water column or distinguishing between males and females. So it's all very basic biology. It's very fundamental kind of questions. And that's a lot of what we get asked by the public. Very simple things like how long does it live and how do you tell boys from girls? You know, these are things that are still unknown in a lot of instances, especially in the marine environment where, you know, acquiring a specimen is a lot more difficult than a butterfly in the backyard.
So when you do some of these things, you can also not only tell about how it grows and its life cycle, but you can also tell how our Earth is changing. Is that right? How the environment in which it lives in is changing.
Yeah, we can definitely see changes, especially, you know, I mentioned that these were collected in 2007. That was a long time ago now. And so we can go back to those same places and we can ask, are we collecting the same types of specimens there? Or have these specimens, do they need colder water, so they've moved further north? So we can ask questions about distribution and how distributions are changing in response to environmental changes, such as climate change. We can also look at these and ask questions about toxins. Are we finding toxins inside of these animals' stomachs?
Microplastics?
Like microplastics or like, you know, other PCBs or any of the other kind of environmental hazards. So there's a lot of opportunity to do that kind of work with a collection like ours. Because we have specimens from 2007, we've got specimens from 1972, we've got specimens from the late 1800s. So we can really use museum collections to kind of reach back in time and form a baseline of what used to be there or what was there once upon a time and compare it to what's there now.
Is there something significant, because this is your area of expertise, is that right? Is there something significant that you have noticed or that the the field has noticed in terms of the changes that specimens like these that have gone through over the years?
Right. Well, setting aside cephalopods for a minute and looking at other types of mollusks, mollusks are calcium-based and they are very susceptible to changes in pH. And so as the ocean waters are changing in their pH, we're noticing that the shells of mollusks can become more thin. They can be more brittle. They can be less sturdy. And so those are the sorts of changes that people are thinking about and wondering about and being concerned about for sure.
I can imagine that there's just a lot of research. I got to ask you, what is the difference, because I don't know, between an octopus and a squid?
Oh, sure, yeah. So they're both types of cephalopods, which means that they have a head and a foot that are put together. So their head and their eyes then have coming basically out of the top of them all of their appendages. And in an octopus, there's only 8 appendages.
Oh, okay.
And in a squid, there's 8 appendages and then 2 specialized additional ones that are used for prey capture. So those are the tentacles, and they'll throw those tentacles out and grab a piece of fish or a crustacean or something else and bring them back to their mouth. So
while these are 2 studies that you're doing, they're not the only studies that you're doing here. There's all kinds of studies being done on different species, etc., right?
Right. So we have a really large mollusk collection, and these are mollusks. So this is part of the mollusk research that goes on. But we also have a very large bird collection, and we have a mammal collection, and we have an egg collection. And so there's research going on in the bird collection, finding new subspecies of birds. We found a new subspecies or species of mollusk recently in our collection. We've also got questions about color that we're looking at, and how color may change depending on the environment that you're in. We've got paleontology questions. We're looking at a very important paleontological collection called the Holmesy Collection, where we're trying to pick out how many different species of snails there are found in that collection. And it looks like there's more than would be expected. So there's something kind of interesting going on there as well. So we've got mollusks and birds, we've got insects, we've got paleontology, we've got botany collections. So we've got a little bit of everything. But our 2 largest and most famous, certainly locally and also nationally and internationally, are the mollusk and the bird collection.
Well, it certainly is fascinating. Thank you so much, Liz, for sharing all of this with us. And when we come back, we're going to introduce you to a very special cat. Stay with us.
This is Wesley Paulson from Clear Space Theater giving a shout out to the 302 and thanking you for supporting live theater at the beach.
Welcome back. We are now in the basement in what's known as Dude's Lair, and I'm joined by Chris Hayden to tell us all about the museum cat who is wildly famous, Dude. Chris, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for coming.
So how did the museum, end up with a museum cat?
Dude showed up to our dumpster around back in the loading dock of March 2009, and he decided he liked it so much he would stay.
That's amazing. And since then, he has been a regular fixture here.
Very much so. He is what everybody remembers about the museum since he's been here.
And he's seen all over the place.
Yes, he could be seen in his younger days running all over the museum and especially the grounds. He loved being outside. But he's getting about almost 15, so he's slowing down a little bit.
Just a little bit, but he has his own social media account, is that right?
Absolutely, almost 2,000 followers. All you have to do is just Google Dude the Museum Cat, and he comes right up.
Absolutely. So, and he, in addition to having his own social media account, he also has a couple of books, is that right?
Yes, he actually has 5 books. The first one is called Dude the Museum Cat, and his last book is about Dude the New Museum, about our new museum here becoming the Delaware Museum of Nature and Science.
So when you read these books, it's really interesting because it's a way to A, get kids to read, and B, they love animals, and also to introduce them to some of the things at the museum.
Absolutely. All the books, of course, were, the first book was about the old museum, but the new book, the Dude's New Museum, does have some of our stuff in it that is here in the new museum. One of the books, Dude Goes Exploring, is all about our outside areas, which are all still here, and so all that is still very relevant.
And that's this one here. And he actually meets a fox.
And yes, the whole book is true. He actually met a fox, and they decided to both go their separate ways, which was good.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the thing that's really interesting is that, like Curious George and the Man in the Big Yellow Hat, you actually play a role in the books as well.
I am Big Guy. Dude refers to me as Big Guy throughout the series of books and on his social media page. He calls me, well, that's what he always calls me, is Big Guy.
Absolutely.
And that's what all the kids call me.
Sure, sure. And there's also a sidekick or a buddy?
Buddy, he does have a little brother, Buddy the Maine Coon. Buddy's not as, how do you say, as easygoing as Dude is. You can see Dude's very easygoing. He loves being around people. Buddy's very high-strung.
Okay.
He's one of the cats. He takes a while to get used to things. So he has to be in an area a while. So he's not as able to be out in the crowd like Dude is.
Sure.
Dude is, his birthday parties are very famous.
Okay.
When we had his 10th birthday party, we had almost 500 people show up.
Wow.
Yes, it was way too much for Dude. He made it through like the first 100 kids because everybody wants to get a picture with him. And for a cat, he did very well. Made it through about the first 100 kids, and he was like, that's enough pictures for today. So after that, we started making the birthday parties sign up only.
Okay.
And we limit it to about 100 people.
Absolutely.
And they always sell out. Very popular.
So he is one of the best ambassadors for the museum.
Yes, I would say so.
Because everybody loves a cat.
Everybody loves Dude. Are you kidding me? Everybody loves Dude.
Especially whenever you can get, there's a number of buttons, right?
And his new button is out, and that will be available at the museum store.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So what do people ask you about him? What's the most common question about Dude?
Where did he show up? How did he get here?
Yeah.
That's his most common question. How did he get here?
So if somebody wants to follow Dude, what do they have to do?
I usually just tell them, just Google Dude the Museum Cat, and his Facebook page is usually the first thing that shows up. Or it's Dude at DMNH on Facebook.
And he's also got an Instagram.
He's got Instagram, a TikTok. Like I say, I don't know about the social stuff, but somebody told me he almost had 1 million likes on TikTok for one of his videos.
He's the hardest working cat.
He is. You can see he's taking this all in stride. He does this very well. He's used to this.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for spending time with us and for giving us the swag and everything. And Dude, thank you.
Well, Dude wanted to make sure he tells you he's a big fan of the 302. He watches the 302 every weekend with me.
Well, thank you, Dude. I appreciate that. We'll be right back. For more information on the Delaware Museum of Nature and Science, you can visit delmns.org. That'll do it for this week's episode of the 302. We're going to leave you now with a beauty shot of some birds native to Delaware on the first floor. Until next time, I'm Jackie Ferris. Tell them you saw it on the 302.